The heat weighed down on the scattered trash, when in a forgotten lot, a thin smoke began to rise between melted tarps and plastic fabrics. A German shepherd lying next to a sleeping baby on a torn mattress lifts his snout. The grandmother, far away, was carrying a water jug under the sun. A lit cigarette flies through the air and falls onto the tarp. The fire grows in seconds, climbing the moldy walls. The dog tries to escape, but the roof is already collapsing. The baby wakes, up, chokes on the smoke, looks for the dog among the flames, and when the fire's light breaks through the only opening, the camera shuts off. Love stories with animals. Then subscribe now and don't miss a single one. Thanks for watching. Now, back to our story. It was a hot, sticky morning in late August, the kind where the air hangs heavy with the promise of change, though not a drop of rain had fallen for weeks. On the outskirts of Oak Ridge, a forgotten corner of Missouri, where maps seemed to lose their detail and city services rarely ventured, stood a small makeshift shelter. Constructed from tarps, scrapwood, and discarded fabric, it barely qualified as a home. But for 3 resilient souls, it was everything. Martha Wilson, a woman in her 70s, with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too much, sat at the edge of their shelter watching her grandson, Ethan, play with a stick in the dirt. The boy had just turned 2 last month, though there had been no celebration beyond the extra apple she'd managed to secure from the food pantry. Beside the child, always vigilant, lay Kaiser, a German shepherd they had rescued 5 months earlier from an abandoned lot. The dog had appeared in their lives as if guided by some invisible force, starving, injured, and wary of humans. Martha had barely enough food for herself and Ethan, but something in the animal's eyes spoke of a gentleness that belied his imposing size. She'd offered him half her sandwich that day, and he hadn't left their side since. "Need to get water today," Martha murmured, running a hand through her thinning white hair. The community center 2 miles away offered clean drinking water, and their last jug was nearly empty. She glanced at Ethan, who was now curled against Kaiser's side, his small fingers buried in the dog's thick fur. "You think you can watch him? For me while I'm gone, boy?" Kaiser's ears perked up, his intelligent eyes fixed on hers as if understanding every word. Martha had come to believe he did. In the months since his arrival, the dog had become more than a pet. He was a guardian, a playmate for Ethan, and sometimes, when the nights grew long and her arthritis flared, the only reason she found the strength to face another day. "We'll be okay, won't we, Ethan?" she said, kneeling to kiss her grandson's forehead. The boy giggled, reaching up with dirt-smudged hands to touch her cheeks. His mother, Martha's daughter, had left him on her doorstep 18 months ago with nothing more than a hastily scribbled note promising to return when she got clean. Martha hadn't heard from her since. "Won't be long," she promised, gathering the empty water containers. "Kaiser's in charge until Grandma gets back." The community center was unusually crowded that morning. A water main break in another part of town had sent dozens of additional people to this facility, creating a line that snaked out the door and around the building. Martha sighed, setting her containers beside her as she prepared for a long wait. "Didn't expect to see you today, Martha," said Ellen, a volunteer who often slipped her extra bread when supplies allowed. "Thought you usually came on Thursdays." "Running low," Martha replied, glancing anxiously at her watch. It was a cheap plastic thing she'd found in a donation bin, but it kept decent time. She never liked leaving Ethan for more than an hour, even with Kaiser standing guard. Didn't think it would be so busy. Water main burst near Westfield. "Everyone's coming here now." Ellen lowered her voice. "How's that little one doing? And that magnificent dog of yours?" A small smile softened Martha's face. "Growing like a weed, that boy. And Kaiser, well, those two are thick as thieves. Never seen anything like it. That dog watches over him like he's made of gold." Back at the shelter, Ethan had fallen asleep. On his thin mattress, one arm thrown over Kaiser's massive body, The dog lay perfectly still, his eyes alert to every sound outside their fragile home. A few yards away, by the fence that separated their spot from an abandoned construction site, a man in a work uniform took a final drag of his cigarette before tossing it aside, his mind already on his next task. He never saw where it landed. The butt, still glowing, settled at the edge of the tarp that formed the outer wall of Martha and Ethan's shelter. A slight breeze fanned the ember, which found eager fuel in the dry fabric and scattered papers. Within minutes, a small flame took hold, creeping quietly along the ground before climbing upward. Kaiser noticed it first. The subtle shift in the air, the acrid scent that triggered ancient survival instincts. He rose carefully, not wanting to wake the child, and moved toward the entrance, his hackles rising as he saw the orange glow beginning to spread across the outer tarp. The dog barked, a deep, urgent sound that startled Ethan awake. The boy rubbed his eyes, confused by the sudden noise and the strange, smoky smell filling their home. Kaiser returned to him, nudging him with his nose, trying to guide him toward the entrance. But the flames had already claimed the doorway. The heat intensified rapidly, plastic materials melting and adding toxic fumes to the thickening air. Ethan began to cough, his small body shaking with the effort to breathe. Kaiser positioned himself between the child and the advancing fire, his own lungs burning. In the confined space of the shelter, the temperature was rising to unbearable levels. The dog looked frantically for an escape route, but every direction offered only flame or collapsing material. In a moment that defied understanding, Ethan, still half asleep and operating on pure instinct, crawled toward a corner where a blanket lay partially soaked from a water spill earlier that morning. With effort that belied his tiny frame, he dragged the damp fabric toward Kaiser, pulling it over the dog's back. "Stay, Kay," he mumbled, the words barely audible through his coughing. He pushed against the large animal, directing him away from the worst of the heat. Kaiser resisted, unwilling to leave the child, but Ethan continued pushing with surprising strength. Outside, the first shouts of alarm were rising. A woman walking her dog had noticed the smoke and was yelling for help, her cell phone already at her ear as she called emergency services. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, growing steadily louder. On the other side of the neighborhood, Martha had finally reached the front of the water line when she heard someone mention a fire near the old construction site. Her heart seemed to stop mid-beat. "Where?" she demanded, grabbing the arm of the man who'd spoken. "Where exactly?" The look on his face confirmed her worst fears, by that vacant lot where some homeless folks have been staying. "Fire trucks are already—" Martha abandoned her water jugs, pushing through the crowd with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Her legs, stiff with arthritis, carried her faster than they had in years, propelled by terror and desperate hope. The 2 miles back seemed endless, each step accompanied by a prayer that formed and reformed in her mind. Please, not them. Please, not my babies. When she reached the street leading to their shelter, a police barricade blocked her path. Beyond it, she could see the black smoke rising, firefighters working frantically, the gleaming red trucks with their extended hoses. And where their shelter had stood, nothing but charred remains. Martha fell to her knees, a sound escaping her that was barely human. A young officer moved toward her, his face etched with concern. "Ma'am, you can't be here. It's not safe." "My grandson," she gasped, clutching at his uniform. "My grandson and our dog. They were in there. They were waiting for me." The officer's expression shifted to one of alarm, and he immediately radioed to the firefighters. Martha watched as the message was relayed, as the team's efforts suddenly intensified, as they began carefully moving through the smoldering ruins. Time seemed to stop. Martha couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the thundering of her heart. And then a shout went up. The firefighters were gathering around something, kneeling, their movements suddenly gentle and precise. "We've got survivors!" someone called. "Get the medics now!" Martha surged forward, breaking past the barricade, before anyone could stop her. What she saw would stay with her forever. A firefighter emerging from the ruins, carrying Ethan, the boy's small body limp but his chest visibly moving with breath. And behind them, supported by two other firefighters, Kaiser, his fur singed but his eyes open, fixed unerringly on the child. "They're alive," someone said beside her. "It's a miracle. We found them together." The boy was lying on top of the dog, like he was protecting him. As the paramedics rushed forward with stretchers and oxygen masks, Martha reached out, her fingers brushing Ethan's soot-stained cheek. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her for just a moment before he turned his head, searching. "Kay," he whispered, the single syllable holding all his concern. "He's right here," Martha assured him, her voice breaking. "Kaiser's right here. You're both going to be okay." But as they loaded Ethan into one ambulance and prepared to take Kaiser to a veterinary clinic in another vehicle, the truth of that promise remained uncertain. Martha watched them separate her family, torn between which one to follow, her heart splitting in two as the ambulances pulled away in different directions, sirens wailing into the hazy afternoon. The pediatric wing of Mercy General Hospital buzzed with unusual activity that evening. Nurses spoke in hushed tones as they hurried past room 307, where 2-year-old Ethan Wilson had been admitted 3 hours earlier. The boy's condition, while stable, remained concerning. Smoke inhalation had irritated his lungs, and minor burns marked his small arms and legs. But it wasn't his medical status causing the stir, it was his behavior. Since regaining consciousness, Ethan had refused to be calmed. His hoarse cries echoed down the corridor, his tiny hands reaching toward the door, repeating the same sound. Over and over, K. No amount of gentle coaxing or distraction could soothe him. Even Martha, sitting beside his bed with tears streaming down her weathered face, couldn't comfort her grandson. "He wants Kaiser," she explained to Dr. Sarah Bennett, the pediatrician in charge of Ethan's case. "They've never been separated since we found that dog. Not for a single night." Dr. Bennett frowned, making notes in Ethan's chart. "The animal is at Riverside Veterinary Hospital, correct? I understand your concern, Mrs. Wilson, but we simply can't bring a dog into a pediatric ward. It's against hospital policy." Ethan's wails intensified, his oxygen levels dropping as he worked himself into greater distress. A nurse rushed in to adjust his mask, exchanging worried glances with the doctor. "His vitals aren't stabilizing," the nurse reported. "His heart rate is too elevated, and his oxygen saturation keeps dipping whenever he gets upset." Dr. Bennett pressed her lips together, her gaze moving from the monitors to the distressed child and finally to Martha's pleading eyes. After a long moment, she set down her clipboard. "Let me make a call," she said quietly. "I can't promise anything, but there might be a way." Across town at Riverside Veterinary Hospital, Kaiser wasn't faring much better. The German Shepherd, despite his injuries, had twice attempted to leave his enclosure, breaking through the temporary bandages on his paws and reopening wounds in his desperate attempts to escape. Dr. Jason Miller, the veterinarian who had been treating him, had never seen such determined behavior in an injured animal. "He needs to rest," Dr. Miller told his staff as they sedated Kaiser for the second time. "His lungs are compromised from the smoke, and these burns need time to heal. I don't understand why he keeps trying to—" The phone at the reception desk rang, interrupting his instructions. A few minutes later, a vet tech approached with an unusual message. "That was Mercy General Hospital," she said, her expression somewhere between confusion and amusement. "They're asking if we can arrange to transfer the German Shepherd to their facility. Apparently, his young owner is refusing treatment unless the dog is with him." Dr. Miller removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Transfer a dog," to a human hospital. That's impossible. There are health codes, regulations. The call came from Dr. Sarah Bennett herself. The tech continued. She said they're preparing a separate room in a non-patient area. Something about a compassionate care exception. An hour later, in a converted storage room on the ground floor of Mercy General, hospital staff wheeled in a special veterinary gurney. On it lay Kaiser, still groggy from sedation, but alert enough to lift his head when the door opened. In the arms of a nurse wrapped in a blue hospital blanket, Ethan instantly stopped crying when he saw his four-legged guardian. "Kay!" he exclaimed, reaching out with bandaged hands. The medical team watched in astonishment as the child and dog were reunited on a makeshift bed. Kaiser, despite his injuries, gently positioned himself alongside Ethan, his large body curving protectively around the boy. Within minutes, Ethan's vital signs began to stabilize. His breathing eased, his heart rate slowed, and the tension visibly drained from his small frame as he buried his face in Kaiser's fur. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Bennett whispered to Martha, who stood watching from the doorway, her hands pressed to her mouth. "It's as if they're healing each other." "They saved each other," Martha replied softly, "in that fire, and before it too." Word of the unusual arrangement spread quickly throughout the hospital. Staff members found excuses to pass by the room, peering through the small window to glimpse the boy and his dog recovering side by side. A nurse snapped a photo on her phone. Ethan asleep with one arm draped over Kaiser, the dogs watchful, eyes fixed on anyone who entered the room. By morning, the image had been shared on social media, captioned simply, "Some bonds can't be broken." The local news picked up the story next. "Miracle at Mercy General, child and dog survivor of fire. Refused to be separated," ran as the evening headline. Viewers across the state were moved by footage of Martha recounting how Ethan had somehow managed to protect Kaiser during the fire, placing a wet blanket over him and pushing him away from the worst of the flames. "The firefighters said they'd never seen anything like it," she told the reporter, her voice cracking with emotion. "They found my boy laying on top of Kaiser like he was shielding him, a 2-year-old child trying to save a dog 3 times his size." In a luxurious home across town, retired Judge Eleanor Montgomery switched off her television, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for a tissue. The story had struck a chord that resonated deep within her soul, vibrating along fault lines. Of grief she'd thought long sealed. 30 years earlier, Eleanor had lost her only child, a son not much older than little Ethan Wilson, to a rare congenital heart defect. The pain had never truly faded. She had simply built her life around it like a city that rises on the slopes of a dormant volcano. Her husband had left 2 years after the funeral, unable to bear the weight of their shared loss. Eleanor had poured herself into her career, becoming known for her fierce advocacy for children's rights in family court. Now, at 68, retired, and alone in the large house she'd once hoped would echo with the laughter of grandchildren, Eleanor felt something stir within her. A pull she couldn't explain but couldn't ignore either. "Rebecca," she called to her housekeeper, "please bring me my address book and phone, and I'll need the car ready in an hour." Back at Mercy General, Martha sat in an uncomfortable chair beside the makeshift bed where Ethan and Kaiser rested. The past 24 hours had left her exhausted, but she couldn't bring herself to sleep. The fire had destroyed everything they owned. Not that it had been much, but it had been theirs. The shelter they'd painstakingly constructed, the few clothes they'd managed to collect, the small box of treasures she'd kept for Ethan, including the only photo of his mother. A social worker had visited earlier, speaking in gentle tones about options and placement for Ethan. The unspoken message was clear: a homeless woman in her 70s might not be considered the best guardian for a toddler, especially one recovering from traumatic injuries. And as for Kaiser, well, there had been no mention of what would happen to him. "We're a family," Martha had insisted. her chin raised despite the fear gripping her heart. "We stay together." The social worker had nodded sympathetically, making notes in her file without committing to anything. Martha knew the system well enough to recognize the signs. Once Ethan was discharged, there would be evaluations, hearings, and decisions made by strangers who couldn't possibly understand the bonds that held their little family together. A soft knock at the door interrupted her worried thoughts. A nurse poked her head in, her expression curious. "Mrs. Wilson, there's someone here to see you. Says she's an old friend, though she wouldn't give her name." Quite insistent, Martha frowned, mentally running through the short list of people who might visit. Ellen from the community center, perhaps, or Pastor Jim from the church that sometimes let them shower in their facilities. "Send them in, I suppose," she said, straightening her borrowed hospital scrubs. The nurses had been kind enough to provide. Clean clothes after her own had reeked of smoke. The woman who entered was not someone Martha recognized. Tall and elegant, with silver hair swept into a neat bun and clothes that spoke of wealth and refinement, she seemed entirely out of place in the makeshift recovery room. Yet there was something in her eyes, a deeply human sorrow and warmth, that immediately put Martha at ease. "Mrs. Wilson," the woman said, her voice cultured but kind. "My name is Eleanor Montgomery. I apologize for the intrusion, but I saw your story on the news, and I..." She paused, her gaze moving to Ethan and Kaiser, still asleep on the bed. A flash of emotion crossed her face, too complex to name. "I felt compelled to come. Are you with social services?" Martha asked warily, her hand instinctively moving to rest on Ethan's small leg. Eleanor shook her head. "No, nothing like that. I'm a retired family court judge, but I'm here as a private citizen, as someone who..." She took a deep breath. "As someone who understands what it means to fight to keep your family together." Something in the way she said those words made Martha look more closely at the distinguished woman standing before her. There was a shared language of loss there, spoken in the slight tremor of hands and the shadows behind eyes. "They want to take him from me," Martha said simply, voicing her greatest fear. "They'll say I can't provide for him. And Kaiser..." She looked at the dog, whose ears had perked up at the sound of a stranger's voice. "They won't understand about Kaiser." Eleanor Montgomery set down her purse and pulled a chair close to Martha's, her eyes never leaving the remarkable sight of the child and dog healing together. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "I might be able to help with that." 3 days after the fire, Ethan's physical condition had improved remarkably. The pediatric staff attributed his rapid recovery to excellent medical care, but Martha and everyone who had witnessed the boy with Kaiser knew better. There was a healing power in their connection that science couldn't quite explain. Dr. Bennett had officially bent several hospital regulations to maintain the unusual arrangement, justifying it as therapeutic intervention essential to the patient's recovery. When questioned by the hospital administrator, she had simply invited him to observe Ethan's vital signs when separated from Kaiser for even 10 minutes. The data spoke for itself. On this particular morning, Martha sat with Eleanor Montgomery in the hospital cafeteria, both women nursing cups of coffee that had long gone cold. Over the past days, the retired judge had been a constant presence, arriving early and leaving only when visiting hours ended. She had listened to Martha's life story, her daughter's struggles with addiction, Ethan's unexpected arrival in her life, the series of misfortunes that had left them homeless, and the miraculous appearance of Kaiser when they'd needed him most. "The landlord doubled the rent overnight," Martha explained, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Said the neighborhood was up and coming, had no choice but to leave. Couldn't find another place that would take both a toddler and a dog. The size of Kaiser, not with what I get from Social Security," Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And Ethan's mother, You've had no contact at all." Martha shook her head, grief momentarily clouding her eyes. "Lisa always had troubles, even as a girl. Too sensitive for this world, I used to say. The drugs were just her way of numbing herself, I think. Last I heard, she was headed west with some man she'd met at a rehab facility. Said they were going to start fresh." She sighed deeply. "That was 18 months ago. The note she left with Ethan said she'd come back when she got clean, but you don't believe she will," Eleanor finished softly. "I want to," Martha admitted. "Every day I look for her face in crowds, but deep down, I think my girl's gone. Whether she's still breathing somewhere or not, I can't say. But the Lisa I knew, my daughter, she's gone." Eleanor reached across the table, covering Martha's weathered hand with her own. "I'm so sorry." "Ethan's what matters now," Martha said firmly, straightening her shoulders. "Him and Kaiser. They need me, and I need them. We're family. Not the kind courts and social workers understand, maybe, but family all the same." Eleanor was silent for a moment, her eyes distant as if seeing something beyond the sterile cafeteria walls. Finally, she seemed to come to a decision. "Martha, there's something I need to tell you. Something about why I came here that first day." She took a deep breath. 30 years ago, I had a son. His name was Michael, and he was the center of my world. He was born with a heart defect, and despite the best medical care money could buy, we lost him when he was 3 years old. Martha's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss, Eleanor. After Michael died, my marriage fell apart. I threw myself into my career, becoming a family court judge. I thought if I couldn't save my own child, I could at least protect others." Eleanor's voice remained steady, though her eyes glistened. "When I saw Ethan and Kaiser on the news, that remarkable bond, the way they saved each other, something woke up inside me. Something I thought had died with my son." Martha listened intently, sensing there was more to come. "I'm not here just as a concerned citizen, Martha. I want to help you and Ethan and Kaiser stay together, yes, but it's more than that." Eleanor looked directly into Martha's eyes. "I have resources, a large home, financial security, connections in the legal system. I want to offer you all a place to stay while you get back on your feet. No strings attached, no expectations beyond. Allowing me to be part of your lives in whatever way feels right." Martha blinked in surprise. "You want us to move in with you?" "Think of it as a temporary solution that could become permanent if it works for everyone," Eleanor clarified. "You would maintain guardianship of Ethan, of course. I'm not trying to replace you, but together we might present a more favorable situation to the authorities concerned about Ethan's welfare." Before Martha could respond, a nurse hurried into the cafeteria, scanning the room anxiously before spotting them. "Mrs. Wilson, there's something happening with Kaiser. The veterinary staff need you right away." Martha and Eleanor rushed back to the room where Ethan and Kaiser had been recovering together. They found a cluster of staff outside the door, including Dr. Miller, the veterinarian who had been overseeing Kaiser's care. "What's wrong?" Martha demanded, fear clutching at her heart. "Is Kaiser—" "He's all right," Dr. Miller assured her quickly, "but something unusual has come up. During his treatment, we discovered Kaiser has a microchip, standard procedure for checking lost pets. We've located his registered owners." Martha felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. Registered owners? But Kaiser was a stray. We found him abandoned, half-starved. According to the records, he belongs to the Lawson family in Springfield. They lost him during the flash floods last year. Almost 8 months ago. They've been searching for him ever since. Dr. Miller's expression was sympathetic but firm. "They're on their way here now. They were overjoyed to learn he's alive." Martha leaned against the wall, suddenly lightheaded. Eleanor stepped forward, her years as a judge evident in her authoritative tone. "Has anyone informed Ethan yet? Or Considered the medical implications of separating these two, Dr. Bennett emerged from the room, her face troubled. We haven't told Ethan, and as his physician, I have serious concerns about the potential trauma of separation, especially so soon. After the fire incident, inside the room, oblivious to the crisis unfolding, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, feeding small pieces of his breakfast muffin to Kaiser, whose tail wagged gently despite his bandaged legs. Their contentment in each other's company was palpable, a bubble of peace that no one wanted to burst. We need to handle this carefully, Eleanor said, taking charge of the situation. Martha, let's speak with the Lawson family when they arrive. Before any decisions are made, they need to understand the full situation. The next 2 hours passed in agonizing slowness. Martha sat beside Ethan and Kaiser, reading stories from a picture book donated by the hospital staff, trying to keep her voice steady despite the dread building inside her. Eleanor made phone calls in the hallway, her low voice occasionally rising with emphasis before dropping again to measured tones. When a nurse finally appeared to announce the Lawsons had arrived, Martha kissed Ethan's forehead and whispered that she'd be right back. He nodded, already distracted by Kaiser gently licking his hand. In a small consultation room down the hall, Martha and Eleanor faced David and Jennifer Lawson, a couple in their early 40s who looked as nervous as Martha felt. Accompanying them was a girl of about 10, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. "This is our daughter, Emily," Jennifer Lawson explained, her hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. "Max, that's what we called him, was her dog. They grew up together." "His name is Kaiser now," Martha said softly, unable to keep the protective edge from her voice. David Lawson cleared his throat. "We understand this is a difficult situation for everyone. The veterinarian and hospital staff have explained about the fire and about your grandson's attachment to Max, to Kaiser." "It's more than attachment," Eleanor interjected smoothly. "There's a documented medical benefit to their continued proximity. Ethan's recovery has been notably accelerated by Kaiser's presence. We've been searching for Max for 8 months, Jennifer said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. We never gave up hope. We've driven to every shelter within 100 miles, followed every lead. Emily checks the lost pet websites every single day. Martha felt a wave of sympathy for this family, despite her own fear of losing Kaiser. They hadn't abandoned their dog. They had lost him and spent months trying to find him again. How could she fault them for that? "Would you like to see him?" Martha offered impulsively. "Kaiser, I mean. He's with my grandson right now." The Lawsons exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Emily spoke up for the first time, her voice small but determined. "Could I? Please." The group made their way back to Ethan and Kaiser's room. Outside the door, Martha paused, suddenly uncertain. "I should warn you, Kaiser is very protective of Ethan. He might not recognize you right away." Emily nodded, clutching her father's hand. As they entered, Kaiser's head lifted, his ears perking forward. For a moment, he stared at the newcomers, no recognition visible in his intelligent eyes. Then, Emily took a step forward, her hand outstretched. "Max, it's me, Em." Kaiser's tail gave a single thump against the bed. He whined softly, a sound of confusion and recognition mingled together. Ethan, sensing the dog's distress, wrapped his small arms around Kaiser's neck. "Kay, stay," he declared, glaring at the strangers with all the ferocity a 2-year-old could muster. Emily stopped, her hand falling to her side as tears spilled down her cheeks. She looked at Kaiser, at Max, and then at the small boy clinging to him. Something shifted in her expression, a realization beyond her years. "Daddy," she said, turning to her father, "Max is helping that little boy, isn't he? Like he helped me after my accident." David Lawson knelt beside his daughter, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Yes, sweetheart, that's what Kaiser does. He takes care of people who need him." A silence fell over the room, heavy with the weight of the decision that hung in the balance. Martha felt Eleanor's hand on her shoulder, a silent support as they waited for what would come next. Finally, Jennifer Lawson stepped forward, her gaze moving from Kaiser to Ethan to Martha and settling on her daughter. "Emily, remember what we always said about Max? About the special job he was meant to do?" The girl nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "You said he had a helper's heart, that someday he might find someone who needed him even more than we did." "I think," Jennifer said gently, "that Max has found that someone. Two someones, actually." Emily looked at Ethan, who was still clutching Kaiser, the dog positioned protectively between the boy and the strangers. After a long moment, she nodded, a child's wisdom shining through her sorrow. "Can I still visit him sometimes?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Martha felt tears spring to her eyes. "Of course you can, honey. Anytime you want." In that moment, in a hospital room that had already witnessed one miracle, a second one unfolded. The miracle of letting go, of recognizing when love meant stepping aside rather than holding on. 1 week after the fire, Ethan was deemed well enough for discharge from Mercy General. His lungs had cleared remarkably, and the minor burns on his arms and legs were healing nicely. Kaiser, too, had made significant progress under Dr. Miller's care. Though his injuries had been more severe, the veterinarian marveled at the dog's resilience and determined spirit. The morning of their release brought both excitement and anxiety. While Martha packed the few donated items they'd accumulated during their hospital stay, children's clothes, toiletries, a stuffed bear for Ethan that he'd promptly named K2, Eleanor finalized arrangements at her home in the Oakwood Heights neighborhood, an affluent area across town that Martha had only ever seen from a distance. "Everything's ready," Eleanor announced, entering the hospital room with a coffee for Martha. "The guest house has been prepared for you and Ethan. It's small but comfortable. 1 bedroom for you, another for Ethan, a living area, and a kitchen. There's a fenced yard connecting to the main house where Kaiser can roam safely." Martha accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks, her expression guarded. Though she'd agreed to Eleanor's offer, temporary housing while they figured out next steps, the reality of moving into a retired judge's estate filled her with trepidation. "We won't be in your way," she said, "not for the first time. And once I find work, we'll contribute to expenses." Eleanor shook her head, a gentle firmness in her voice. "Martha, this isn't a business arrangement. You're not tenants. You're guests. Matter? Friends, I hope." She hesitated, then added more softly, "Having you there, it brings life back to a home that's been too quiet for too long." Before Martha could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. Dr. Bennett entered, followed by several nurses, orderlies, and even the hospital administrator. Behind them, a local news crew hovered with cameras at the ready. "What's all this?" Martha asked, automatically stepping closer to Ethan, who was sitting on the floor beside Kaiser, showing the dog pictures in a book. Dr. Bennett smiled, a hint of mischief in her expression. "Word got out that our miracle pair is leaving today. The staff wanted to say goodbye, and the media..." She shrugged apologetically. "Your story has touched a lot of hearts, Martha. People want to help." The hospital administrator stepped forward, clearing his throat importantly. "Mrs. Wilson, on behalf of Mercy General, we'd like to announce that all medical expenses for both Ethan and Kaiser have been covered by anonymous donors. Additionally, we've established a recovery fund for your family that has already received significant contributions from the community." Martha blinked in astonishment, her hand rising to her throat. "I don't understand." A nurse she recognized from the night shift stepped forward, smiling. "After your story aired, our phone lines were flooded. People wanting to help, to donate, to offer whatever they could. It's been overwhelming in the best possible way. The news reporter, sensing a moment, moved closer with her microphone. Mrs. Wilson, how does it feel to know your grandson and his dog have inspired such an outpouring of support? Martha looked helplessly at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. It's unexpected, Martha managed, her voice thick with emotion. We're just trying to survive day by day, to keep our family together. And that's exactly what's touched people, the reporter pressed. This extraordinary bond between a child and his dog, and your determination to keep them together despite everything. Do you have any message for those who've been moved by your story? Martha knelt beside Ethan and Kaiser, drawing strength from their presence. Just thank you for seeing us, for understanding that family comes in all shapes and forms. Her weathered hand rested on Kaiser's head, a gesture of quiet gratitude. And maybe, if your heart is open to it, consider visiting your local animal shelter. There are so many Kaisers out there waiting for their person. The camera lights flashed, capturing the moment. A grandmother, a toddler, and a German shepherd. Their unlikely bond a testament to resilience and love against all odds. Later, that afternoon, a small procession made its way to Eleanor Montgomery's estate. Dr. Bennett had insisted on accompanying them to ensure Ethan's transition went smoothly. The Lawsons, David, Jennifer, and Emily, had also asked to be present, bringing supplies for Kaiser, along with toys and books for Ethan. As Eleanor's car passed through the ornate iron gates and wound up the tree-lined driveway, Martha pressed her face to the window, taking in the manicured gardens and the imposing Georgian-style mansion that loomed ahead. Beside her, Ethan bounced excitedly in his car seat, pointing at squirrels darting across the lawn. "Big!" he exclaimed, his vocabulary limited but his meaning clear. "Yes, it's big," Martha agreed, wondering not for the first time if she'd made the right decision. How would they fit into this world of privilege and polish? Would Eleanor regret her impulsive offer once the reality of living with a rambunctious toddler and a large dog set in? As if sensing her thoughts, Eleanor glanced back from the passenger seat. The guest house is just around this bend. It's more modest than the main house. I think you'll be comfortable there. The car slowed as they approached a charming cottage. Set apart from the mansion but connected by a stone pathway, single-story with a welcoming porch and surrounded by a white picket fence, it looked like something from a storybook. The kind Martha used to read to her daughter before life took its harsh turns. This was originally the caretaker's residence, Eleanor explained as they parked. When I retired, I had it renovated as a potential art studio, but I never quite found the time for painting. Inside, the cottage exceeded Martha's expectations. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating comfortable furnishings that were nice without being intimidating. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the dining table, and a welcome basket filled with snacks and essentials sat on the kitchen counter. Most striking was a custom dog bed in the living room corner, large enough for Kaiser and positioned near a child-sized armchair. Emily helped pick out toys for both of them, Jennifer Lawson explained, gesturing to a chest overflowing with items. She wanted them to feel at home. Emily, who had been quiet since their arrival, stepped forward with a framed photograph. "This is for Kaiser," she said, handing it to Martha. "So he remembers he has two families now." The photo showed a younger Emily with her arms around a younger Kaiser, Max, as he'd been then, both looking joyfully at the camera. Martha felt her throat tighten with emotion. "We'll put it right here," she said, placing the frame on a side table, "where he can see it every day." While the adults continued the tour, Emily sat cross-legged on the floor with Ethan and Kaiser, showing the boy how to properly throw a ball for the dog to fetch. A game limited by the confined space of the hospital room, but perfect for their new home. Dr. Bennett took Martha aside, reviewing Ethan's care instructions one final time. "He's doing remarkably well, but watch for any signs of respiratory distress, especially at night. and the follow-up appointment is scheduled for next Tuesday. Eleanor has offered to drive you." Martha nodded, only half listening as she watched. Ethan's delighted giggles when Kaiser gently returned the ball to his lap. The sound of her grandson's laughter, something she'd feared she might never hear again after the fire, filled her with a profound sense of gratitude. "I never thought we'd end up here," she admitted quietly. "When you live on the streets long enough, you stop expecting good things to happen." Dr. Bennett smiled, following Martha's gaze to the unlikely trio on the floor, a child, a dog, and a girl who had made the difficult choice to share rather than reclaim. Maybe that's the real miracle in all of this. Not just that Ethan and Kaiser survived the fire, but that their story opened so many hearts, including yours, to the possibility of better days ahead. As evening approached, their visitors departed, with promises to return soon. The Lawsons would come on Sunday for their first official visit with Kaiser, and Dr. Bennett would check in by phone tomorrow. Eleanor, after ensuring they had everything they needed, retreated to the main house with gentle insistence that they make themselves at home. "The kitchen is fully stocked," she said from the doorway, "but if you'd like to join me for dinner, in the main house, I'm having a simple pasta at 7, no pressure either way." When she'd gone, Martha sat heavily on the sofa, the emotional weight of the day finally catching up with her. Ethan, exhausted from the excitement, had curled up. On Kaiser's new bed, the dog positioned protectively beside him. Both were fast asleep, their breathing synchronized in the peaceful rhythm that had become so familiar during their hospital stay. Martha gazed around the cottage, their home, at least for now, and tried to reconcile this turn of events with the desperate circumstances they'd faced just weeks ago, from a makeshift shelter by an abandoned construction site to a guest house on a judge's estate, with a community rallying behind them and a recovery fund that promised security they hadn't known in years. It seemed unreal, like something from one of the daytime television shows she occasionally glimpsed through store windows. Yet the changes weren't just external. Something had shifted within Martha herself, a thawing of the protective shell she'd built around her heart after her daughter's departure, after so many disappointments and closed doors. Eleanor's generosity, the Lawsons' grace in letting Kaiser stay with Ethan, the hospital staff's dedication, the community's response. Each act of kindness had chipped away at her defenses, allowing hope to take root where only weary resignation had lived before. At 7 o'clock, after settling Ethan and Kaiser in their new bedroom with the door ajar so she could hear if needed, Martha walked the stone path to the main house. Eleanor answered her knock with a warm smile, ushering her into a kitchen that was surprisingly cozy despite the grandeur of the home. "I thought we'd eat here rather than the formal dining room," Eleanor explained, gesturing to a small table set for two by a bay window overlooking the gardens. "More comfortable that way." Over a simple meal of pasta and salad, the two women found common ground despite their vastly different life experiences. Both had known profound loss, both had built lives around protecting those they loved, and both, in their own ways, had been lonely until Kaiser, Ethan, and an unexpected fire had brought them together. "I have a proposition," Eleanor said, as they shared a dessert of fresh berries and cream. "Something I've been considering since we first met." Martha set down her spoon, wary of the serious tone. "What kind of proposition?" "I'd like to establish a foundation," Eleanor explained, her eyes bright with purpose, "using my resources and the attention Ethan and Kaiser's story has generated. A foundation focused on keeping families together, all kinds of families, including those with animal companions." Martha listened as Eleanor outlined her vision, a program to provide housing assistance to families at risk of separation due to financial hardship, with special emphasis on accommodations that accepted pets, support services for elderly individuals, caring for young children, resources for animal-assisted therapy and education about the documented benefits of human-animal bonds, especially for vulnerable populations. The Kaiser Foundation, Eleanor finished, watching Martha's reaction carefully. With your permission, of course. Martha was silent for a long moment, considering all the implications. You're talking about something much bigger than just helping us. Yes, Eleanor agreed, because your story has revealed a need that goes far beyond one family. Think of how many others are out there. Grandparents raising grandchildren without adequate support, families choosing between housing and keeping beloved pets, children who could benefit from the kind of healing connection Ethan and Kaiser share. Martha thought of the nights she'd spent awake in their makeshift shelter, wondering how much longer she could keep Ethan safe, how she could provide him with the stability every child deserved. How many others lay awake with similar fears? I don't know what I could contribute to something like that, she admitted. I'm not educated, not connected. You have experience, Eleanor interrupted gently. Real, lived experience that no amount of education can provide. And your story, your family's story, has already proven its power to move people to action. She hesitated, then added, besides, I need someone to keep me grounded, to remind me of the real issues faced by the people we'd be trying to help. Outside the window, darkness had fallen, the garden illuminated by soft landscape lighting. In the distance, Martha could see the warm glow from the cottage windows, her temporary home where Ethan and Kaiser slept peacefully, safe at last. I'll think about it, she promised, knowing in her heart that she'd already decided. For the first time in years, she had been offered not just charity but partnership, not just assistance but purpose. As she walked back to the cottage later that night, the stone path lit by solar lamps, Martha felt the weight of the past begin to lift. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. And for tonight, that was enough. 6 months after the fire, the guest cottage on Eleanor Montgomery's estate had transformed from a temporary shelter into a home filled with life and laughter. Photos adorned the walls. Ethan playing in fallen leaves, Martha and Eleanor at the hospital fundraiser, Kaiser with his fur fully regrown, looking regal in the garden. The changes in the physical space, however, were minor compared to the evolution of its inhabitants. Martha, who had spent years focused solely on survival, now directed her energy toward the newly established Kaiser Foundation. What had begun as Eleanor's vision had quickly become a shared mission. 3 days a week, Martha worked from a small office in the main house, coordinating with social services to identify families at risk of separation due to housing insecurity. Her first-hand experience navigating poverty and homelessness with a child and pet in tow gave her insights that Eleanor's legal expertise and financial resources complemented perfectly. Mrs. Thompson called again, Martha announced, entering Eleanor's study with a stack of folders. The landlord's giving her, until the end of the month, 2 grandchildren, a cat, and nowhere to go because the affordable housing complex doesn't allow pets. Eleanor looked up from her computer, glasses perched on the end of her nose. Thompson, she's the retired nurse, correct? Her daughter's in recovery? That's her, Martha confirmed, settling into what had become her chair by the fireplace. Classic case for our emergency housing fund. The younger grandchild has asthma, so we'd need to ensure proper ventilation, air filtration. Add her to the board agenda for Wednesday, Eleanor decided after a moment's thought. I think we can expedite this one. This was their routine now, identifying needs, allocating resources, building a safety net one family at a time. In the months since its founding, the Kaiser Foundation had already helped 15 families remain intact, either by providing direct housing assistance or by working with landlords to revise pet policies. A partnership with local veterinary clinics ensured accessible care for the animals, while a network of volunteer contractors helped modify properties to accommodate various needs. Outside the study window, evidence of the foundation's broader impact played out on the estate grounds. Every Saturday, families from across the community gathered for what had become known as Kaiser's Club, a support group where children and their pets participated in structured activities designed to strengthen their bonds. Emily Lawson, despite living across town, never missed a session, her natural affinity for both animals and younger children making her a favorite among the participants. Today, she led a small group through basic obedience exercises, Ethan and Kaiser serving as her demonstration team. At nearly 3 years old, Ethan had blossomed into a confident, chatty child whose vocabulary expanded daily. His special connection with Kaiser remained, but it had evolved from desperate dependence to a partnership built on trust and mutual affection. "Good job, Ethan," Emily called, as the toddler successfully guided Kaiser through a simple obstacle course. "Now tell him stay and walk to me." Ethan's face scrunched in concentration. "Kaiser, stay," he commanded, his small voice carrying surprising authority. The German Shepherd immediately froze in position, eyes fixed adoringly on the boy as he toddled away. From the sidelines, other children watched in awe, their own dogs of various sizes and breeds sitting or fidgeting beside them. Among them was 8-year-old Marcus, a recent addition to the group, whose hands flapped with excitement as he observed. The boy, diagnosed with severe autism, rarely spoke and struggled with social interactions, but his connection with Rosie, a gentle border collie mix, had opened new pathways for communication. "He's stimming less when Rosie's with him," his mother had reported at the last parent meeting, and his therapist says his sleep has improved dramatically since she started spending nights in his room. Stories like these accumulated weekly, each one reinforcing the Foundation's core belief that the bond between children and animals could be therapeutic, transformative, and worth preserving at all costs. Dr. Bennett, who had become the Foundation's medical advisor, was compiling data for a research paper on the physiological benefits of these relationships, using Ethan and Kaiser's remarkable recovery as her primary case study. As the Saturday session wrapped up, Martha handed out refreshments from a folding table set up on the lawn. Eleanor moved among the families, listening to concerns, offering advice, putting her decades of legal expertise to work, identifying systemic barriers they could address through advocacy. Judge Montgomery called Susan Chen a single mother, whose apartment building had recently threatened eviction over her daughter's emotional support rabbit. "I got the reasonable accommodation letter you drafted. The property manager backed down immediately." Eleanor smiled, pleased but unsurprised. "Excellent. Remember to document all communications going forward, just in case." While the adults chatted, the children gathered around Kaiser, who had assumed the role of unofficial therapy dog for the group. His patience with grabby toddlers and skittish teenagers alike seemed limitless. Even now, as Marcus cautiously approached, hand extended but gaze averted, Kaiser remained perfectly still, allowing the boy to make contact at his own pace. "He remembers everyone," Emily told Martha proudly, helping to collect used paper cups. "Dad says he always had an old soul, even as a puppy." Martha watched as Ethan guided Kaiser to a quieter spot beneath a tree, where the dog immediately flopped onto his side, inviting the children to pet his exposed belly. "He's teaching them as much as we are," she observed. "Patience, boundaries, unconditional acceptance." The success of these weekend gatherings had not gone unnoticed in the broader community. Local news had covered the Foundation's work several times, focusing on the unlikely partnership between a retired judge and a formerly homeless grandmother. Their story resonated across divides of class and circumstance, a powerful reminder that common ground could be found in the shared value of connection and compassion. Not everyone approved, of course. Eleanor's former colleagues sometimes raised eyebrows at her new focus, questioning the allocation of resources to what one retired prosecutor had dismissively called pet projects. The Social Services Department, while officially supportive, occasionally bristled at the Foundation's advocacy for policy changes that would recognize animal companions as essential family members rather than disposable luxuries. "You've stirred up quite the hornet's nest with that proposal," Richard Simmons, the county's child welfare director, had told Eleanor during a recent meeting. "Next board session is going to be contentious." Eleanor had merely smiled, the steel beneath her genteel exterior visible for a moment. "I've faced contentious boards for 30 years, Richard. The difference is that now I'm fighting for something that actually works." As the afternoon progressed and families began to depart, David and Jennifer Lawson arrived for their regular visit with Kaiser. Though they had legally relinquished their claim to the dog, their ongoing presence in his life had evolved into something beautiful. An extended family connected by shared love rather than obligation or guilt. "We brought his favorite treats," Jennifer announced, holding up a paper bag, "and Emily's staying for dinner if that's still okay." Martha welcomed them warmly. These visits, initially awkward with unspoken tensions, had become comfortable rituals that enriched everyone involved. Ethan now called them Kaiser's other people and looked forward to their stories about the dog's puppyhood. For Martha, watching her grandson develop these connections, this chosen family that expanded beyond traditional boundaries, was a gift she had never dared to hope for during their hardest times. That evening, after a lively dinner in the main house kitchen, where Emily regaled them with tales of middle school drama and David shared photos from Kaiser's early days with their family, Martha and Eleanor sat on the porch of the guest cottage, watching Ethan and Kaiser play a gentle game of tug-of-war in the fading light. "I had a call from Dr. Reeves at the university today," Eleanor said, sipping a glass of iced tea. "They want to establish a research partnership with the Foundation, a formal study on the impact of animal companionship on children in crisis situations." Martha nodded, unsurprised by this latest development. The ripples from Ethan and Kaiser's story continued to spread in unexpected directions. Will they provide funding? Better than that. They're offering scholarships for family therapy certification, specifically for individuals with lived experience of housing insecurity or familial separation. Eleanor turned to face Martha directly. "I submitted your name as a potential candidate." Martha blinked in surprise. "Me? Eleanor, I didn't even finish high school. I'm hardly university material." "You're exactly what they're looking for," Eleanor countered firmly. "Someone who understands these issues from the inside out, who can translate between academic theory and practical reality." She paused, her expression softening. "Besides, you're the most naturally gifted counselor I've ever met. You've been doing the work already. This would just make it official." Martha fell silent, watching as Ethan abandoned the tug toy and threw himself onto Kaiser's back, giggling as the patient dog carried him a few steps before gently rolling over, careful not to squash the boy. The scene blurred slightly as unexpected tears filled her eyes. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here, considering going back to school, helping run a foundation..." Her voice trailed off, overwhelmed by the contrast between then and now. Eleanor reached across the space between their chairs, briefly squeezing Martha's hand. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Sometimes terribly, sometimes wonderfully." As darkness settled over the estate, lights flickered on in windows across the property. The main house, the guest cottage, the small apartment above, the garage, where the Foundation's first full-time employee now lived. What had once been a lonely monument to Eleanor's grief had become a vibrant community center, humming with purpose and connection. Later that night, after Ethan was tucked into bed with Kaiser maintaining his customary position on the floor, beside him, Martha sat at the small desk in her bedroom and opened her laptop, another gift from Eleanor that she'd initially resisted but now used daily for foundation work. The university's website was already bookmarked, the application for the special scholarship program displaying on the screen. Martha's cursor hovered over the personal statement section, a blank text box awaiting her story. How could she possibly condense the journey that had brought her here, the years of struggle, the fire that had nearly taken everything, the miraculous chain of events that followed, the transformation not just in their circumstances, but in her own sense of what was possible? From Ethan's room came the sound of soft snoring, both human and canine, a duet that still filled her with gratitude each night. Martha began to type, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. My name is Martha Wilson. 1 year ago, my grandson, our dog, and I were living in a makeshift shelter on the edges of society. Today, I help run a foundation dedicated to keeping families like ours together. This is how it happened. The words flowed more easily than she expected, her story unfolding on the screen, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to resilience, to the unexpected gifts that could emerge from crisis, to the power of connection across differences of age, experience, and circumstance. As she wrote deep into the night, Martha realized she was no longer just recounting the past. She was claiming a future that, for the first time in decades, seemed limited, only by imagination rather than by circumstance. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. This late-in-life transformation, from survivor to advocate, from recipient to provider, from someone defined by what she lacked to someone recognized for what she offered. When she finally closed the laptop, the application complete and submitted, Martha stood at the window, looking out at the moonlit grounds of the estate that had become home. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed midnight, marking the boundary between one day and the next. Martha smiled, feeling unexpectedly ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. 2 years after the fire that had nearly claimed their lives, Martha stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge Hotel, a sea of attentive faces before her. The annual Kaiser Foundation Gala had drawn hundreds of supporters, from local business leaders to national advocates for housing reform. Behind her on stage sat Eleanor, elegant in midnight blue, and Emily Lawson, now 12, and serving as the Foundation's official youth ambassador. In the front row, David and Jennifer Lawson beamed proudly beside Dr. Bennett and Dr. Miller, who had remained deeply involved in the Foundation's work. But Martha's eyes sought only one face in the crowd: Ethan, now 4 years old, sitting at a special table near the stage with Kaiser faithfully at his side. The boy wore a little suit that matched the bow tie someone had playfully fastened around Kaiser's neck for the occasion. Both looked slightly uncomfortable in their formal attire, but Ethan gave his grandmother a thumbs up as their eyes met. 2 years ago, Martha began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, my grandson and I lived in a shelter made of tarps and scrap wood. We had almost nothing except each other and a German shepherd who had somehow found his way to us when we needed him most. The room fell silent, captivated by the stark reality of her opening. Some had heard parts of their story before, but few knew all of it. When fire destroyed our shelter, we could have lost everything, including each other. Instead, that fire became the catalyst for something none of us could have imagined. Martha gestured to the images projected on the screen behind her. Photographs documenting the Foundation's growth from a small operation run out of Eleanor's study to the multifaceted organization it had become. Images of families reunited, of children with their beloved pets, of renovated properties that accommodated both human and animal needs. In the past 2 years, the Kaiser Foundation has helped over 200 families stay together when circumstances threatened to tear them apart. We've partnered with 12 shelters to create emergency housing that welcomes pets. We've changed municipal codes in 3 counties to recognize the importance of animal companionship for vulnerable populations. Pride colored her voice as she continued. We've established therapy programs in 5 schools, bringing certified support animals to children struggling with trauma and emotional challenges. And through our scholarship program, we've helped 15 individuals with lived experience of housing insecurity pursue education in social work, family therapy, and veterinary medicine. What Martha couldn't mention without becoming emotional was that she herself was among those 15 scholarship recipients. At 57, she was the oldest student in her counseling certification program, but her practical wisdom and first-hand experience had quickly earned the respect of both professors and classmates. The woman who had once believed her education was permanently behind her now maintained a perfect GPA while simultaneously helping run a growing foundation. None of this would have been possible without the extraordinary people who came together. Around 1 child and 1 dog, Martha continued, acknowledging each key figure with a nod. Judge Eleanor Montgomery, whose vision and resources turned a moment of crisis into a movement for change. The Lawson family, who taught us that sometimes love means letting go. The medical professionals who recognized that healing happens in many forms, not all of them found in textbooks. Martha paused, gathering herself for what came next. And there's someone else we need to thank, someone who isn't with us tonight, but whose absence created the space for all of this to happen. A hush fell over the room. This was a part of the story that had never been shared publicly before. My daughter Lisa left Ethan with me over 3 years ago, promising to return when she was ready. For a long time, I waited and worried, certain that she was gone forever, either by choice or by circumstance. Martha took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I received a letter postmarked from Arizona. Lisa is alive. She's been in recovery for 18 months, working at a rehabilitation center, helping others find their way back from addiction. Murmurs rippled through the audience. On stage, Eleanor reached for Emily's hand, both aware of what this revelation had meant to their extended family. Lisa isn't ready to come home yet, Martha continued, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. But she's healing, finding her own path back to wholeness. And when she is ready, whether that's next year or 5 years from now, there will be a place for her in our lives, in our unconventional family that has room for all kinds of love and all kinds of redemption. Martha smiled at Ethan, who was now leaning against Kaiser, the dog's head resting protectively on the boy's lap. My grandson once placed his small body between his dog and danger, instinctively protecting a creature he loved. That act of courage revealed something essential about the human spirit, our capacity to care for each other across boundaries of species, circumstance, and understanding. Reaching the conclusion of her speech, Martha's voice grew stronger, fueled by the conviction that had carried her through these transformative years. The Kaiser Foundation exists because we believe those connections are worth preserving, that families come in all forms, that healing happens in relationship, and that sometimes the most important bonds we form are the ones that defy easy categorization. We've seen it in our own lives and in the hundreds of families we've been privileged to serve. When we make space for love in all its expressions, we create possibilities that extend far beyond what any one of us could imagine alone. The applause that followed was thunderous, the audience rising to their feet in recognition not just of Martha's words, but of the journey they represented. As she stepped away from the podium, Ethan broke free from his seat and ran to her, Kaiser trotting faithfully behind. Martha lifted her grandson into her arms, Kaiser pressing against her legs, in a three-way embrace that embodied everything the Foundation stood for. Eleanor joined them a moment later, completing the circle. "Magnificent speech," she whispered to Martha, "not a dry eye in the house." The rest of the evening unfolded in a blur of congratulations and conversations. The gala exceeded its fundraising goal within the first hour, ensuring another year of expanded programs and services. Prominent donors pledged support for new initiatives, including a veterinary care fund specifically for families facing economic hardship and an advocacy campaign targeting state-level housing policies. Long after most guests had departed, Martha found herself on the hotel's terrace with Eleanor and the Lawsons, watching as Emily taught Ethan a new trick to share with Kaiser. "We received another inquiry about replicating the model," Eleanor mentioned, sipping a celebratory champagne. "This time from Chicago. They want to send a team to observe our operations next month." David Lawson nodded, pride evident in his expression. "It's extraordinary how far this has come. When we made the decision to let Max Kaiser stay with Ethan, we never imagined it would lead to all of this." "Neither did we," Martha admitted, thinking back to those first uncertain days in Eleanor's guest cottage. "I was just focused on keeping us together, one day at a time." Jennifer squeezed Martha's hand. "Sometimes the smallest decisions have the biggest impacts." Emily was heartbroken at first, but watching her grow through this experience, finding purpose in helping other children and animals, she shook her head in wonder. "It's been a gift for all of us." As the evening wound down, they gathered their things and prepared to head home, all of them to Eleanor's estate, which had expanded its housing capacity to accommodate the Foundation's growing staff and the regular presence of the Lawsons, who now spent most weekends there. What had begun as a temporary arrangement had evolved into an intentional community, a chosen family connected by purpose as much as by circumstance. Later that night, after Ethan was tucked into bed with Kaiser in his customary position on the floor beside him, Martha sat in the living room of what was now officially her home, no longer the guest cottage, but her permanent residence, deeded to her by Eleanor in a gesture that had left both women emotional. She opened her laptop to check email before turning in, finding a new message from her daughter. Lisa's communications were still irregular, but increasing in frequency, each one revealing another layer of healing, another step toward the possibility of reunion. Tonight's message included a photo, Lisa with her recovery group, standing outside a desert treatment center, her smile tentative but real, her eyes clear in a way Martha hadn't seen in years. "Mom," the message read, "I watched the live stream of the gala tonight. I don't have words for how proud I am, how grateful for the way you've cared for Ethan, for the incredible work you're doing. I'm not ready to come home yet, but for the first time, I can imagine a future where I might be. Keep a light on for me. All my love, Lisa." Martha traced her daughter's face on the screen, tears blurring her vision. This too was part of the miracle that had unfolded from that terrible fire. The slow, uncertain restoration of a relationship she had thought beyond repair. Not guaranteed, not complete, but possible in a way it hadn't been before. A soft knock at the door interrupted her reflection. Eleanor stood there, still dressed in her gala finery, though she'd kicked off her formal shoes. "I saw your light was still on," she explained, holding up 2 mugs of tea. "Thought you might want to decompress after such a big night." Martha welcomed her in, making room on the sofa. Just reading an email from Lisa, she watched the live stream. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "That's a big step. How are you feeling about it?" "Hopeful," Martha admitted after a moment's thought. "Cautiously hopeful, which is more than I'd allowed myself to feel for a very long time." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea and listening to the occasional soft snores from Ethan's room. The past 2 years had transformed them both. Martha, from a desperate grandmother fighting to keep her family intact, to a respected advocate and student counselor. Eleanor, from a lonely retired judge to the vibrant center of a growing community. Neither change would have been possible without the crisis that had brought them together. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Martha asked suddenly. "If the fire hadn't happened, if you hadn't seen us on the news, if the Lawsons hadn't found Kaiser's microchip?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I look at everything that's grown from those moments, the families we've helped, the policies we've changed, the community we've built. And I think perhaps this was always where we were meant to arrive. Different paths might have led here, if not these particular ones." Martha nodded, understanding what Eleanor meant. The specific circumstances that had brought them to this point were unique, perhaps even miraculous. But the underlying truth, that connection across differences could heal and transform, that family could be created as well as born, that second chances sometimes arrived in unexpected packages, that truth would have found its way to them somehow. The foundation. A gala committee suggested a theme for next year, Eleanor mentioned, as she rose to leave. Full circle, to honor how far we've come, and to acknowledge that every ending creates the possibility for a new beginning. Martha smiled, thinking of all the circles that had closed and opened in their lives. Kaiser, finding his way from the Lawsons to Ethan, and back to a connection with both. Eleanor's grief for her son finding resolution in her relationship with Ethan. Martha's own journey from caregiver to professional, from recipient to provider. And Lisa, perhaps someday, completing her own circle of departure and return. "Full circle is perfect," she agreed. "That's exactly what this has been." After Eleanor had gone, Martha stepped quietly into Ethan's room for one last check before bed, a habit she had maintained since his infancy, and saw no reason to abandon now. The boy slept peacefully, one arm dangling off the bed to rest on Kaiser's back. The dog's eyes opened at Martha's approach, alert even in repose, his gaze following her as she adjusted Ethan's blanket and pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Good boy, Kaiser," she whispered, crouching to ruffle the fur behind his ears. "The best boy." Kaiser's tail thumped once against the floor in acknowledgement, then he settled back into his protective position, secure in his purpose and place. In their lives, Martha stood watching them for a moment longer, these two beings whose extraordinary bond had catalyzed so much change. From the ashes of that fire had risen not just their survival, but a transformation none of them could have foreseen. Proof that even in the most desperate circumstances, connection could prevail, healing could happen, and love, in all its forms, could light the way forward. As she turned to leave, Martha whispered a quiet thank you to Kaiser, to Eleanor, to the Lawsons, to all who had been part of their journey, and even to the fire itself. For in its destruction had been the seeds of creation, in its ending the beginning of something far greater than any of them could have imagined alone. Full circle indeed, and yet also a spiral, continuously expanding outward, touching more lives with each revolution, creating new possibilities with each turn. Martha closed the door softly behind her, leaving Ethan and Kaiser to their dreams, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new families to help, new connections to forge. The light she kept burning for Lisa would remain, a beacon of hope and homecoming, but so too would the lights they were kindling all across the community and beyond, small flames of possibility illuminating pathways out of darkness for those who, like them, needed just one chance, one connection, one moment of grace to transform crisis into catalyst, strangers into family, and loss into lasting legacy. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Ethan, Kaiser, and Martha has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a thumbs up. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the extraordinary bonds that can form between humans and animals. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your comments and hearing which parts of this remarkable journey resonated most with you.